Careful, buddy. This isn't that kind of place.
Dad, can we just go?
Not yet, sweetheart.
Something wrong?
No. Something's about to be right.
The wine hit his chest before the laughter did. Marcus Reed stood frozen in the middle of the dining room. A dark red stain spreading across white linen and navy wool. Soaking into the jacket he had pressed himself that morning at 5 o'clock, in the quiet of a kitchen lit only by the stove light, careful not to wake his daughter one floor above. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward him in that instant, the way a room turns when something has gone wrong and no one is sure yet who is at fault. Nobody moved to help him. Nobody offered a napkin. For 3 full seconds, the only sound in the restaurant was the soft, final drip of wine falling from the edge of the table onto the marble floor. The waiter did not apologize. He smiled instead. The kind of smile that comes easily to people who have never once had to wonder whether a room like this one was built to include them. He said it loud enough for the tables around them to hear, loud enough that it landed less like an accident and more like a verdict, that this wasn't that kind of place, and Marcus, somehow, did not belong in it. Marcus said nothing. He looked down at the stain the way a man looks at a wound he has decided not to acknowledge in front of witnesses. Across the table, his daughter's hand found his under the white tablecloth, small and warm and trembling slightly, the same way it had trembled years earlier on a night neither of them talked about any more. What none of them understood, not the waiter enjoying his small performance, not the table by the window already laughing, not even the man who would soon walk through the kitchen doors, was that in exactly 11 minutes, this same room would fall silent again. Not because of spilled wine this time, because of what Marcus Reed actually was, and how long he had chosen, quietly, not to say it. This is his story. 3 weeks before that wine ever touched his suit, nobody who passed Marcus Reed on the street would have looked at him twice. And that was exactly how he had built his life to be. He was 41 years old, single father, every weekday morning, long before the sun came up over the modest brick apartment building he called home. He stood in a kitchen barely large enough for 2.
Have a great day at school,
packed his
okay?
daughter's lunch
Thank you so much, Dad.
into the same faded, cartoon-covered lunchbox she refused to let him replace, because she had decided, at age 7, that it was lucky, and some beliefs, once formed in a child who has already lost one parent to distance, are not worth arguing against. He made her oatmeal the way she liked it, too much cinnamon, never enough sugar, and he listened to her talk about school with the kind of attention most people save for things they are afraid of losing. At night, after she had gone to bed, he sat alone at that same kitchen table with a legal pad and a calculator, going over numbers that, to anyone glancing over his shoulder, might have looked like the quiet arithmetic of a man barely keeping his head above. Water, rent, groceries, the cost of new shoes for a girl whose feet would not stop growing. He let people believe what the numbers on the surface suggested, because the truth beneath them was heavier, more complicated, and not something a 10-year-old needed to carry before she was ready. The truth was this: Marcus Reed had spent 18 years clawing his way through an industry that had rarely, if ever, made room for him without a fight. He started as a bellhop at 19 years old, carrying suitcases that cost more than his monthly wage, sleeping some winters in the back seat of a car, with a broken heater because rent and his mother's medical bills could not both be paid in the same month. He sent money home before he sent it anywhere else, year after year, without complaint, without anyone asking where it came from or what it cost him to send it. He worked his way from bellhop to front desk, from front desk to night manager, from night manager into rooms where decisions were made instead of simply carried out. He learned contracts by lamplight after 12-hour shifts. He learned the difference between being tolerated in a room and being trusted to shape what happened inside it, slowly, invisibly, over the better part of 2 decades. Marcus Reed became something almost no one who met him assumed he already was. He did not talk about those years, not to co-workers who complimented his modest sedan without knowing why he still drove it, not to neighbours who assumed the long hours meant a job just barely holding on rather than a portfolio, quietly holding up an entire hospitality group, and certainly not to Zoe, who saw only a father who picked her up from school every single day without fail, who never missed a recital, who wore the same slightly worn charcoal suit to the handful of formal occasions there. Small life required. What people did not see was the folder locked in his glove box, the one bearing his full legal name on embossed letterhead, the one that listed, in small and formal print, exactly what he had built and exactly what he owned. He kept it there not out of secrecy for its own sake, but because he had learned, painfully and repeatedly over 18 years, that revealing what he had before people decided who he was changed nothing about, how they treated him, and revealing it after usually changed everything, in ways that told him more about them than he ever wanted to know. Tonight was supposed to be simple. It was Zoe's 10th birthday, and Marcus had chosen one restaurant for the occasion, for reasons he had not yet told her. He wanted her to walk through those doors and simply enjoy herself first, the chandeliers, the small basket of warm bread, the sparkling cider poured into a glass, too elegant for a child's birthday dinner, before he said anything at all about why this particular restaurant, out of every restaurant in the city, was the one he had chosen. He had built the Aldridge on 5th from an idea sketched on a napkin 8 years earlier, in partnership with a man named David Whitfield, back when neither of them had the capital or the reputation to be taken seriously by anyone in the industry. Marcus had put in more than money. He had put in every lesson 18 years of being underestimated had taught him, about hospitality, about dignity, about what it meant to walk into a room and be seen as fully human before anything else. He wanted Zoe to grow up understanding that the two of them did not have to shrink, themselves to belong anywhere, especially not somewhere he had helped build with his own hands and his own name. He had no idea driving her there that evening with a wrapped gift in the back seat and a small velvet box of a different kind in his jacket pocket, that before the appetizers even arrived, an ordinary young waiter with an easy, careless smile was about to test exactly how far that quiet lesson would need to go. The Aldridge on 5th had opened 8 months earlier to reviews so glowing that food critics across 3 publications had run out of new synonyms for elegant. Marble floors stretched beneath crystal chandeliers. The wine list ran longer than most short novels. It was the kind of restaurant where a reservation functioned as its own kind of currency, where the wrong shoes at the door could quietly, politely, cost a person their table. Marcus and Zoe were seated near the swinging kitchen doors, at a table clearly not chosen for a celebration, though no one said so directly. The hostess had looked him over, the slightly worn cuffs of his jacket, the unremarkable sedan the valet had parked without comment, the absence of anything that visibly announced wealth, and asked, with a politeness that did not quite reach her eyes, whether he was certain he had a reservation under that name. He did. He had made it himself 3 weeks earlier, using the same legal name printed on the incorporation. Documents locked in his glove box. A name that meant nothing to the young woman checking. Her list and everything to the man standing on the other side of the kitchen doors. The waiter arrived 12 minutes later, young and confident in a way that comes easily to people who have rarely, if ever, been told no. He mentioned, loudly enough for the table, to hear and pointedly enough that it could not be mistaken for a passing comment, that the kitchen had been slammed tonight with actual reservations. Zoe did not understand what the remark meant. Marcus understood it completely. He let it pass without a word, the way he had let so many similar remarks pass over 18 years. For her sake, always for her sake, swallowing something, small and bitter, so that the person across the table would never have to carry it too. He ordered sparkling cider for his daughter and, for the first time in months, allowed himself a single glass of the house red when it arrived at the table. The waiter set it down at an angle that no accident could easily explain, and the glass tipped and the wine came down across Marcus's chest in a single dark wave that soaked instantly into linen and wool. The waiter's response
buddy.
was not
This
an
isn't
apology.
that kind of place.
It was a performance, loud, careless,
Dad, can we just go?
delivered with a smile
Not yet,
for the
sweetheart.
benefit of the surrounding tables, informing Marcus, in front of his own daughter, that this simply was not that kind of place. Laughter rippled outward from a nearby table. Somewhere behind them, a phone was raised. Not out of concern, but curiosity. The particular cruelty of strangers, who sense a small spectacle unfolding and cannot resist watching it play out. Zoe's face went pale in the way a child's face goes pale when she understands, without yet having the words for it, that something unfair has just happened to someone she loves. Her hand found his under the table again, the same way it had on a night years earlier that neither of them spoke about, and she whispered that they should just leave, that it was okay, that they didn't need to stay. Marcus
Dad,
looked at
can
his
we just
daughter for a
go?
long moment. 10 years old, already trying to protect her father from a room that had decided, within minutes, exactly what kind of man he was. He thought, in that instant, about every job interview across 18 years where he had been quietly asked to step outside for a moment. Every apartment showing where a landlord who had sounded warm on the phone suddenly remembered the unit had just been rented. Every time he had folded something bitter into a small, quiet place inside himself so that someone smaller than him would not have to carry it too. For one long moment, he almost said yes to his daughter. Instead, he reached into his jacket for his phone. Not to call a lawyer, not to raise his voice or demand a manager the way the moment might have justified. He typed for words to a contact saved simply as a name he trusted. A partner who had built this restaurant beside him from nothing. and sent them, without another word, to anyone at the table beside him, a request, quiet and specific, asking that person to come to table 14 immediately. Then he folded his hands, wine still soaking into his shirt, and waited. 90 seconds later, the kitchen doors swung open, with a force that made several nearby tables look up from their meals. The man who walked out was not a floor manager, sent to smooth over a customer complaint with a comped dessert. It was David Whitfield, operations director for the entire Aldridge Hospitality Group, a man who had flown in that very morning for what was supposed to be a routine, unremarkable inspection. He had not planned on witnessing anything at all tonight, let alone this. He crossed the dining room in long, fast strides that drew every eye in the restaurant, and stopped at table 14 with an urgency that made it immediately unmistakably clear that whatever was happening here mattered far more than a spilled glass of wine. He asked Marcus, voice tight with a mixture of concern and controlled anger, whether he and Zoe were all right, apologizing in a way so immediate and so genuine that it silenced the laughter still lingering at the nearby table. The room, which moments earlier had gone quiet over an accident, now went quiet over something it did not yet understand. The waiter's easy confidence faltered for the first time all evening. He asked, confused, whether David actually knew this man. The same question written silently on the faces of everyone now watching. David turned toward him, and his voice, when it came, was calm in the specific way that only makes a warning land harder. He explained plainly that the man standing in front of them owned 40% of the restaurant group that employed every person in that building, that his name sat directly beside David's own on the incorporation papers filed years earlier, that the waiter had just spilled wine on one of the two founders who had built the Aldridge from nothing and had laughed while doing it. Marcus had not said a single word of this himself. He had not needed to. 18 years of being underestimated had taught him something that no amount of shouting ever could, that the truth, spoken plainly and without embellishment, does more damage to a false assumption than any raised voice ever manages to do. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet and even, the same tone he used at midnight when Zoe couldn't. Sleep and needed reassurance, rather than volume. The waiter's face drained of colour as the weight of what he'd done settled fully around the dining room. Phones that had been raised minutes earlier for amusement were now raised for an entirely different reason. Not to laugh at a man in a ruined suit, but to capture what suddenly felt like something people would want to remember. The waiter was terminated within the hour, though not by Marcus, who never once raised his voice throughout the evening. The decision came from David, who cited an incident report. Marcus had quietly requested be filed before dessert had even been offered, not out of vengeance, but because he understood that a moment like this could not simply be smoothed over with a comped meal and quietly forgotten by morning. David offered to comp the entire evening. Marcus declined. Instead, he asked that every employee understand something by the following morning that would outlast this one uncomfortable night. The next day, Marcus called an all-staff meeting, arriving in the same charcoal suit, freshly cleaned and pressed by his own hands at 5 in the morning. He stood before 40 employees, not to humiliate anyone, but to share one lesson. He told them they never truly know who is sitting at their tables. They cannot see from a worn jacket or an ordinary car. What a person has survived to reach that seat. He urged them to treat every guest with dignity. Not because they might be important, but because it is always the right thing to do. He fired no one else. He didn't need to. The story had already become a lesson. 3 weeks later, Marcus returned with Zoe to the same table near the kitchen doors. No cameras, no audience, just a father keeping a quiet promise. Between the appetizer and dessert, Zoe finally asked if her father was rich. Marcus smiled and said he was rich in the ways that mattered most. And everything else was simply numbers on a page. He never wanted recognition for that night. But between the spilled wine and the silence that followed, Marcus Reed proved something he had always known. His dignity had never been his to prove. It had only ever been theirs to remember.
If Marcus Reed's story reminded you that character is worth more than wealth, then you're in the right place. Welcome to the Hope Stories, where faith, courage, kindness, and second chances come alive through unforgettable stories that inspire millions. Subscribe now, like this video, and share it with someone who needs hope today. Your next favorite story is only one click away. Because at the Hope Stories, every story reminds us that hope always has the final word.